Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. It's 12 o'clock, so I'm allowed to say that. I hope everybody's well. If you're here already, thank you. If you aren't, we'll give everybody kind of 90 seconds to join, and then we'll get going. How are you doing, Ian? Excited and ready for today?
Very excited, as ready as I'll ever be.
Fantastic. I feel like we're both just buzzing with energy. We feel like it's just, you're on well Monday. Yeah, let's go. No, I'm looking forward to it. I'm just saying to Ian beforehand, for people who obviously weren't here behind the scenes, I've got some builders next to us. So I'm hoping they're not going to make tons of noise for us today, and we can make it through this without interruptions. And hopefully, like it does on every other call, it scuffles out those background noises as well.
And I have a husky in the background, but hopefully she seems quite chill, so we shouldn't be interrupted there either.
Yeah. I'm not sure which one will cause more disturbances. If I'm honest, it's not boiling hot, so I can imagine she's a bit more comfortable.
Yes. As am I.
Yeah, fine. Is your husky's relatively young, right? Like a puppy?
No, she's 8 years old. I also have a little Labrador puppy who's 6 months. That's fine. Yes. Yeah,
I remember you having a little puppy. Okay, let's get going. Ian, thank you for joining me. I'm excited to have this conversation. I think we were having this little conversation just beforehand, that AI is everywhere. We're having lots of conversations talking about AI. And I think, hopefully, I'm hoping this conversation is a bit different and we can create shed some light on how the impact of it, how it can help, also how humans are going to be a human part of this culture within the workplace as well. I do find, if I'm really honest, some of the AI conversations now are just a little bit tedious and a little bit dull. So I'm hoping we bring out some interesting thoughts, and actually talking about culture and workplaces and HR might just help some people here in learning some different things and how we can kind of, I don't know, protect ourselves as human beings in this potential future we got.
Absolutely. No pressure there. I shall try not to make the conversation dull.
I'm sure you won't. I know you won't. To get started, let's get an introduction. It'd be really nice to know who you are, what you do, so people can understand kind of the journey and why you're now talking about what you do.
So I run my own company, Enlightened People, and I'm an AI-enabled HR consultant. That's what I call myself. Mm-hmm. So that means giving AI consultancy advice strategy to HR leaders, or indeed C-suite, and more moving into actual delivery of workshops and training. So everywhere between the more kind of high-level strategy across to actually how to use the tools and the products with an angle really on how you use it specifically in teams and roles within HR, although I do work with small and medium businesses as well. Mm-hmm. So that's me. It's worth saying as well, I still do a bit of HR consulting on the side, which is kind of my test ground for using AI. So I don't really want to lose that, because I'm learning skills that I can pass on to others. And before that, I worked in HR. I came in through data and analytics and system implementation. So I was techy enough, but then moved into the people side. So I was an HR director for about 7 or 8 years. So when AI sort of arrived, as we know it now, with kind of ChatGPT 3, I think, I saw a gap for myself in combining the kind of technical knowledge and the people knowledge, and sort of forging the bridge to sort of impact how that's managed in organizations, and make people feel empowered and not scared or skeptical of AI. Although skepticism is an important part of it.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I can see that. Right, the skepticism is an important part if you are comfortable with trial and error, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's I'm such an AI evangelist, if you like, but it doesn't mean I deny there are any issues with it, because there's a lot. I think it's just like any new technology, it's understanding how it works, what it is, what it's good at and what it's terrible at right now, But also understanding the risks, like as they practically apply to you as an organization, as a leader, and mitigating those. I think sometimes what some organizations are doing is just panicking, seeing the risk is too high and shutting everything down, which I think is counterproductive. You have to engage with AI because it is coming. It's already here, but it's continuing to touch all aspects of our lives and our work lives. And I think there's a real challenge for organizations and leaders in kind of managing that risk and what's right in which circumstances. So yeah, that's my take anyway. And especially from an HR perspective, HR teams, like legal teams, deal with like some of the most sensitive and privileged information there is. So we have to be incredibly careful from a kind of governance perspective. But we also have to, and are just by our nature, I think, very conscious of the human impact and the psychology of change, because there's a lot of change happening right now, and I think that's where we're well equipped to sort of bridge that gap.
Yeah. I want to touch on your experience before we get into the conversation, right? Going from tech and data into HR, an interesting kind of path or career path. How do you think that's benefited you in comparison to maybe people who've just gone through that HR career?
Well, to be honest, I've had a very varied career. Before that, I worked in television news. That's where I started, and then moved into kind of camera equipment companies. But I was always quite early on moved into kind of leadership management positions, and then worked in the event industry and music festivals. So like I've been around the block, I suppose, a few times. But I've always enjoyed that people angle and that management angle. But my way back into HR was because I just had a natural aptitude, I think, for sort of data and analytics. And I worked in an organization where I could see that would be a real value. So that was my way in. And I think I always say, even now, I'm as technical as I need to be. So I'm not a coder, and I can understand a lot of the jargon that software developers will be talking about, or even AI, the sort of architecture behind it. But I'm not necessarily the person who can do it. I can communicate it to other people. But I think those sort of early days, if you like, gave me a really useful perspective, which I'm still sort of falling back on now, and in fact more so than ever in the last couple of years. And that comes from understanding the importance of processes, which sounds really dull, but it's absolutely crucial. Your data integrity, again, sounds very dull, but these things, like from my perspective, are crucial. They'll underpin everything in an organization, and you have to have those things in place for AI to have any meaningful impact. Because if you have a broken organization with sort of broken processes and broken data, AI is only going to amplify that. And so nothing's changed there, in that those types of things have always been important, but they're just, the impact of getting it wrong is much greater with AI, because it reaches much deeper into your systems, and it will just replicate, the worst you've got in your organization if you don't have it in order in the first place. So there's definitely a big part about governance. But also, I think, on the other side of it, being in HR from that perspective, you're so embroiled in the importance of culture. And I think that's the other thing particularly, which now is so key. People think about AI transformation, which is still a term I don't really like, but I think it's slightly highfalutin. I tend to use much more down-to-earth language. But when it comes to AI transformation, culture is crucial. It's absolutely key. People treat AI rollouts like they're just tech projects, but they're not. They are, but they're also people management projects, because there is a huge impact on people, from what they think about AI, and from the expectations of roles, particularly the expectations and changing, kind of skill set required if you're a leader. And I think most people have not caught up with that at all yet. We're all still finding our way. But if your culture isn't right and your data and processes are poor, then you're always going to struggle. It's just the AI is going to amplify that and make it worse.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think when listening to you, it reminded me of the importance of the role of, I don't know, the data. I know data is like the human data, isn't it? Of some of the conversations you have, the governance around the legal element of it. I can imagine having really strong security within those is going to be really important when it comes to AI.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's it's important for every part of an organization, for whether it's commercially sensitive information, or it's in a special category, which is what most of our HR information is, because it's personal to the people who we're working with. But yeah, it adds an extra layer of caution. That's really what I would say, which is where it's challenging now. So the things that we've bored people's senses with for years, like say talking about the importance of GDPR, none of that's gone away. It still matters just as much as it ever did. And there's a new, which is difficult to say, EU AI Act, which is coming into force. Which, even though it doesn't hit us in the UK yet, I think will become a standard that people will replicate elsewhere. So I always say, like, from that perspective, because it is something I talk a lot with people leaders, because it's one of their big concerns. Can you trust AI, but also is the data secure? And if you're getting information, is it going to be wrong? And you can mitigate a lot of that, but it's important to be honest, about what the risks are as well as the benefits. As I say, nothing is fundamentally different when it comes to AI than any other kind of data protection policy or data privacy act. Doesn't really make any difference, except that, as I've said before, and probably will say again, AI amplifies the risks. So you still have to be clear about what information you are processing using AI. Most people aren't doing that yet. You have to say why you're doing it. You have to say how much of that data you're keeping and what purposes you're using it for. So all those things are no different than they ever were. But like an interesting question now is, well, if you're putting things into a company endorsed chatbot, like, is all that subject to like subject matters requests? And the answer is yes. If someone is using your information or referring to you, then you own that data. So you just have to be much more disciplined about your data management, and you can do all that. You can do all that, but it doesn't just happen automatically. The sort of AI frontier models all have kind of data protection statements built in, but it doesn't mean that you've done your due diligence, and you just can't afford to get it wrong with some of the information that people in my profession would deal with, in the same ways that would be for finance or legal. And then the other side of that, I would say, I'm talking about sanctioned tools, but there's a huge problem now of shadow AI, which is where using tools they shouldn't be for work purposes. And that, you see, is sort of coming back to the risk side. I think you can be paralyzed by the fear and the risk and shut everything down. And that's what I see some organizations do. They just panic and they say that we're not using AI, everyone's banned. That's a very short-term solution, but I think it means that people are naturally finding their own solutions and using tools they shouldn't be, probably feeding information they definitely should not be feeding into free or low-cost chatbots. You lose all control. So I think that's why you've got to work with your people to find like a solution that works, that isn't going to mean that they are put at a massive disadvantage from other people who have access to these tools. And the other thing I've seen increasingly, which I understand why, but it's really challenging, is that a lot of companies, they're very cautious, but they started rolling out, sort of premium AI subscriptions to a very small number of people, maybe more techie people, more and more senior people, which is great. It's a starting point, but then it means that you have huge inequities within organizations, because you suddenly have people and teams who've got superpowers and others who don't. And there's if you're not using this, if you don't have the same access to those tools, then there's a real inequity building up about what you can achieve and what the expectations of your role are. So there's no black and white answers here, but there's lots of discussion about the way forward, and every company I speak to is taking a slightly different position.
Yeah, you used the word shadow AI, and I think I understand what it means, but it'd be good just for you to explain what a shadow AI is, just in case you're a little bit like me and it's not entirely sure.
No, it's it's just that. It's a tool that someone is using in the shadows that they shouldn't be. So, we should all be using the tools that our companies provide for us, because they are, they're covered by your enterprise level security, and your IT team sort of know what everyone's using and have control over that, who has access. Shadow AI would be if I was an employee of a company, you didn't give me access to any AI tools, but I knew that my personal chat GPT could help me smash out this research in a PowerPoint presentation. I would, take my information out of the company tenant and plug it into chat GPT, get an amazing output. Great, except that by using a tool that isn't sanctioned, you've probably breached GDPR. If you're using a free tool or even a low-cost one, that might have gone into the training data, that might be stored in a server somewhere, which your technology team are not comfortable with, and it's especially sort of risky, or even potentially illegal, if you are putting any identifiable or personal data in there. The general rule is, two things. Number one, if a tool is free, it means you're the product, which is a bit of a cliche now, but it's true. That's why Facebook's free, because they're training on your data. Same thing with a free version of ChatGPT or any other tool. And whenever you're dealing with a free or low cost tool, you have to, I would never put anything in there that you wouldn't be happy to email to a stranger. And that might sound a bit extreme, but you have to think forward to what's the worst case that could, what's the worst case scenario. And that's how we have to think sometimes in the people world. The worst case scenario is that you put something in that you shouldn't into ChatGPT. Say it was a commercially sensitive business proposal that was, which was not for public consumption. There was a huge data breach at ChatGPT, or OpenAI, the company behind it, and that information was leaked. You would be in the firing line if you had fed that information into that tool and shouldn't have done. So I usually say this when I'm doing workshops, and I'm like, I don't mean to scare you, but I actually do, because you really should be doing that. And I think the best companies are the ones who are recognizing that these are risks, and actually not penalizing people, saying, look, whatever you've done before, stop it. Let's have an honest discussion. This is why this is important. And we're going to work with you to find ways that you have access to tools that will help you do your job better, without you having to bend the rules or even break them. Those are the ones who are sort of making progress. And there's some who are just, frozen by terror and are slipping further behind every day.
Yeah, I hear that. Being open to it and working with the people with you in your team to make sure that you are not breaking rules, but also supporting your people in the right way, so they can do their job as well as they possibly can do.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that.
I want to get back into kind of how AI could help HR teams. So what does, well, I guess this is probably multifaceted, right? But when you think about the day-to-day work, how can AI help that day-to-day HR team?
So specifically in an HR team, a whole number of ways. I mean, you have to remember with AI, it's a tool, it's a general purpose tool, which we know it's flexible. It can be used for any number of purposes, and the skill is often just finding ways to apply that to very specific tasks or professions, and that's kind of where I come in, I suppose. So So let me talk about sort of ground up. I mean, you know, the best place to start with AI, because it's such a quick win, is to look at sort of repetitive administrative tasks or workflows that are repeated again and again and again. So recruitment, sort of, you know, talent acquisition is a really good case study that a lot of people use, because there's a lot of admin, there's a lot of calendar bookings, there's a lot of screening of CVs, there's a lot of you know, repeated interview, you know, templates, job description templates, you know, just a lot of repetitive tasks. So that's always a good place to start. Anything that, you know, you can build into a workflow. You know, and that doesn't always have to be with AI, but AI often enhances it and adds additional sort of logic or thinking to do that in a much smarter way than we ever have before. So there's admin tasks. I think for HR in particular, well, number one, you know, if you think about what we do, it's a very language focused, you know, world. There's a lot of policy, there's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of communication, and LLMs, by their very nature, large language models, are great at helping you with language tasks. So that could be anything from drafting policies or letter templates or responding to complicated emails, through to chatbots. Really good use case there. You know, your company policies are all in a folder. You set up an agent that can just respond to people's questions. And when it gets really smart, when you're building in connections and getting, you know, really taking advantage of context and tools, then, you know, that policy chatbot can not only just say these are the number of, you know, holidays you're entitled to in a year. It can say, I see your balance is X. When would you like to take it? You know, that's how you start to build the complexity with these things. So anyway, there's that. There's more admin heavy jobs. There's also and language focused roles. Even things like, you know, we don't really like to talk about much, but things like you know, grievances and disciplinaries. If you take a typical grievance case, that can involve thousands of documents, you know, scores of interviews. And if you're using AI safely, you know, and within the guardrails, that can help you analyze a lot of data, you know, very, very well, and help you achieve what you would always have achieved, you know, using your human skills and insight, but getting you there much, much quicker. But I'm trying to think of some other use cases. So many. I mean, so many. Learning and development. I was with the team last week, and they were talking about, you know, they had a lot of kind of early careers, even outreach in schools and so on. They did a lot of training and a lot of presentations. I mean, just amazing for that. You know, you can produce a slide deck with images and really, you sort of pull your message together very, very quickly and easily. So anyway, there's the very practical side, which is a great place to start. Anything that tends to be the dull jobs. People always want to start with the exciting, sexy things, but actually you're best to start with the simpler things. Yeah. But beyond that, you know, it can help at all levels. You know, I think it's particularly, you know, when I'm talking to leadership, for example, or even managers. You know, managers, AI can support you massively with being a better manager. You know, mapping out time for one-to-ones, for example, which people always struggle with, coming up with templates or agendas, capturing that, prompting you to take action on things you said you would, sort of capturing meetings through sort of meeting note takers. That's another really powerful thing. If you combine that with AI, you can do remarkable things. And then finally, I would say, you know, at the top, AI can help you, you know, in the more strategic side of leadership generally, but HR, you know, in particular, for me, as a thought partner. You know, I'd never outsource my brain to it. I think that's a real risk, which we all face at one time or another. But it can, if you're using it well, it can give you information which can enhance the way you think. It can challenge you. That's, I think AI isn't sort of designed by default to challenge you, but you can teach it and train it to challenge you. And which I think is the thing I get most value from. And also being honest, and you know, done it myself, being a, you know, an HR director, it can be pretty lonely at times. You know, and actually having a tool which seems like it's a person, it's not, but it, you know, it's sort of, it's quite comforting to be able to bounce your ideas off someone who has no agenda, if you like. Now there's risks in that, of course there is, but as long as you understand them and you don't let yourself fall into the trap of anthropomorphizing it, then I think it can be really helpful for that as well. So yeah, I could go on all afternoon, but I think that's a good place to start what it looks like in practice.
Yeah. And you see those and feel, obviously, I use AI to help with some of this stuff. When I think about it from a workplace and what you're talking about, that one of the biggest things here I see is saving time.
Yeah.
And being able to do some quite complex things quickly, potentially without more resources. So I guess my big thing, which I think a lot of people, and this is where the AI thing is coming from, especially how you feel it in the workplace, is that, am I going to be replaced?
Yes. I mean, again, that's another very genuine concern that people have. And I think a lot of people fudge the answer, and I really don't. I'd say, well, I suppose to jump back a little bit, it's, you know, return on investment is what everyone is talking about with AI, because companies are spending, you know, a lot of money on AI tools and on AI rollouts. And so there is a pressure, particularly on HR, to sort of demonstrate what that return is. And I think sometimes we're measuring the wrong things. So it's very easy to make a case of, you know, return on investment in terms of time saved, you know, doing things quicker and more efficiently. That's just really easy to demonstrate. You know, it's easy to say, like the return on investment of that is simple in terms of, you know, figures, because you can see, you know, my Microsoft Copilot license costs, I can't remember what it is now, but it's you know, going to be a couple £100, say, but actually I'm going to save 7 hours a week. If you work that out as a percentage of my salary, it's like a, you know, easy peasy. It's like 6 times return on investment. But I think you have to go beyond that. Okay, we're saving time, but what are we using that time for? You know, and that's where I think there's 2 ways to look at investment in AI if it's done well. You can either look at it as, yeah, we can use AI to replace people, you know, and that will happen, and that and is happening in some places right now. It's really an approach that's saying all we care about is the bottom line, and we'll keep doing the same with fewer people, you know, which has been the same since the beginning of time, really, when it comes to business perspectives and the ways that people look to manage businesses. But on the other side, I think the more productive way of looking at it is that because it saves time, it means that it frees you up to do the types of projects or tasks that you never had time to before. And so actually, you know, if you maintain the same sized team, they're suddenly able to do 4 times as much and can really deliver a lot more value and innovation and support growth. Now, those are 2 very kind of, slightly extreme examples. A lot of cases will fall in the middle. The thing I think about job loss is something you have to address. It's one of the common concerns that comes up right at the start. Will AI replace me? So, number one, will AI replace me? Probably not right now, is my answer. It's more likely to replace some of the tasks you do. So, if your job is largely administrative based and you sit at a computer, then yeah, your job is at risk. I can't pretend otherwise, because AI will, in some instances, can already do that as well as you can, and not many people are comfortable to say that. But the growth in the power of these things is exponential. So, I wouldn't have said it was realistic, that a lot of roles would be replaced based on where AI was a year ago, but that's different now. But what I think where companies are making mistakes is in not being honest about that. It's because what's happening is a lot of companies are rolling out, AI transformation programs and not addressing the concerns that people have. And guess what? If people think that their job is at risk because of AI, they're not likely to really engage with it. Surprise, surprise. So it's interesting. Some companies, so Walmart, for example, recently said we're adopting AI, but there will be no job cuts as a result of that. And immediately, everyone relaxed a little. I thought, well, great. Let's actually learn how to use this tool. And I saw some figures actually at the conference I was at this week, which was, if people don't believe there's any risk of losing their job, they're sort of 2.5 times more likely to really embrace it and learn how to use it. And that's no surprise. It really isn't. So yeah, look, I think my perspective is, will jobs be replaced by AI? Yes, some will, unfortunately. But what is much, much more likely will be that roles will change dramatically, or the shape and content of roles will change dramatically. And it needs smaller teams. That's just the truth of the matter, especially if you look at a function like HR, the admin parts will be replaced. And there's no point pretending otherwise. But the tech isn't quite there yet for most roles. But ask me again 6 months and it might be a different
I was going to say, 6 months down the line, you could be doing everything for you. I wanted to bring that HR role into this because we're looking at kind of HR and the culture of HR as well, right? How there is obviously some roles which are very kind of task dependent. How you said that the roles will shift. How do you see those roles shifting? How, for somebody here who is worried and maybe listening, what do you think? What's your advice to them in regards to making sure that they are taking the risk out of their future?
I think the way to look at it is, what skills do I need now, and what am I going to need in the future? And being very proactive about that, because most organizations, a lot of organizations haven't caught up with that yet. So I'd say take ownership. If you're thinking ahead to what comes next. And like I said, think about what are the parts of the role that AI could not replace that you do. Really honestly, think about that. And you have to have some level of understanding of where AI is at, to even make that assessment. So that's the first thing I would say, is be curious and learn as much as you can about AI. And if you have, a tool that your company allows you to use, then use it. Really make the time to sit down and learn and think about use cases in your role. And with you, especially if you're a manager, I think there's a lot you can do in terms of owning that sort of embrace of new technology, and making sure that your team utilize it but understand the risks. So the first thing I would say is think about what makes you what you bring to your role that AI can't replace. And those things are going to be what people might call the softer skills, which I always think sort of slightly diminishes them, because they're not soft skills. They're probably the most important skills. You know, your critical thinking, I think you could argue AI can do that to some degree, but there's a level of insight and instinct that just can't be replaced by humans yet, and probably never will. You need to be the human in the loop. You need to develop those skills of analyzing outputs from AI and challenging them. You know, using your skills and experience to spot what AI will miss, because it does get things wrong. To sort of to present it in a way that's going to fit your organization or your audience, and to think like a human in terms of what it's outputting. As ridiculous as that seems, it's true to say. And what are the other things? You know, like, for example, now being able to communicate well, stand up in front of an audience. I mean, that is going to be a hugely valuable skill, because, you know, an AI can't replace that. And even, you know, when it comes to AI generated people, I think I find them very distasteful, and a lot of other people do. What people value is humanity now. And I think being vulnerable, being open, being honest, showing the workings. I think, you know, if anyone can produce a polished PowerPoint slide that sounds half convincing, which we all can now, it's not really how shiny things look. It's about the quality of the thinking behind it and how you communicate that. That's what will matter more going forward. And then in a more practical way, you know, in terms of what the technology means, it will mean managing agents, you know, like they are employees. And that's the bit that I think is blowing people's minds right now, but it's definitely coming. And even here for some of us already, you know, you're actually at this conference I was at, someone said, and it's sort of stark but true, the workforce is no longer only humans. That's the reality. Agents, to explain to people, you know, you think of a chatbot, I ask a question, it gives me a response. There's kind of a sliding scale where that sort of adds on what you would call harnesses, is the kind of techie term, where it just has access to tools. So it's like a chatbot that you're bolting things on so it can do more independently. And what you would think of as a very advanced agent is a chatbot that is sort of grown so clever that it doesn't just answer your question or do one task, it can run a project from end to end. So you can say, this is what I want to achieve, these are the constraints, go off and do it. And it may think for hours, if not days, do multi-steps, fix things along the way, and probably not come back to ask you anything else until it comes to the very end. So it becomes much more like managing a person. And that's what we're going to have to get used to. So the more you learn about AI and the more you can show that you've got AI literacy, those are the skills I would be investing in. And literacy isn't just about the technical aspect to that, although that certainly helps, because you don't really need to be technical, to be honest. When I say the technical side, it's how you use those tools. You know, like you would have learned to work Excel or Word. You know, it's no more complex, in fact, easier than that. But AI literacy is more than that. It's about understanding the governance risks, what hallucination is, what bias is, how you mitigate these things, how you create and build agents that work effectively together. These are all skills of the future. So being critical and analytical of what AI outputs and contributing to what it gives you. I always say, like, it's a very broad rule of thumb, but it's what I always teach to people, is if you're sort of thinking about where AI picks things up and hands them over, in the best case scenario, it's 10, 80, 10. So if you spend 10% of your time really thinking about what you want it to do, giving it lots of context, clear instructions, examples, whatever that happens to be. Then you put that into AI, and in an ideal world, depending what the task is, it can do up to 80% of that. But then it comes out and you still have to do the final 10%. That's where you're the human in the loop, and that bit is essential. But it does mean that you've saved 80% of a task. So it's like, what do you use that time for? And that's the way we should be thinking, you know, in terms of what value we bring to our organizations.
Yeah, I really like that 10-80-10 as a model to think about how it works. And actually, you can't just put it into AI and expect that to be the finished piece as well. Right?
Never. And I've done that myself, and I think that's it's a kind of cautionary tale. And again, it's being honest and open about these things. And I think that's what, you know, when it comes to leaders anywhere, that's one of the things we're talking about, being vulnerable and open and honest. And people do respect that. And in fact, that's something that people value more in an age where technology and AI is absorbing so much. And I when I first got to grips with AI and really seriously was trying to learn and, you know, how I could use it, I got slightly giddy. And I think people do. They're like, wow, this is amazing. This can do my job for me, and I'll, you know, go off down the pub. And early on, I remember I did a project where it was like stuff I could do, bread and butter, kind of performance management based. And I found this amazing tool. I could put in what I wanted, and it generated the most impressive, you know, presentations and plans you've ever seen. And I was like, this is great, but I kind of skimmed it. And I really regretted that, because there's a real danger of sort of cognitive decline with AI. I didn't own it enough. I really needed to go through the whole thing and challenge it and critically think about whether I agreed with every aspect, or if there was things I would have tweaked, and to put my own tone of voice and spin on it and years of experience, you know. And I didn't do that the first time around. So number one, I didn't really feel I owned it. And there were things in there that I kind of wished hadn't been in there. And it taught me, you know, very early on that it's very beguiling to think that AI can do your job for you, but it can't. It helps you. It's a collaboration tool. It's a co-thinker, but you still need to own the work and make it your own. At the end of the day, which is a sort of related topic, which I'm really big on, is that you can't blame the AI, you know, for the work you produce. It's still your work. It's like you've used a research assistant, you know, who's helped you get there. But you can't blame AI. You can't say, oh, I'm sorry, these figures are wrong because AI told me to do it. It's your job to check that and take responsibility for the output. And I think when you frame that really clearly to people, they do think differently about it. Anyway, those are some of my key thoughts around that.
Yeah, and I think you said, right, like part of, and I think about it from a coaching aspect, part of the power of coaching is the processing power of the thought and the talking part. So that 80%, if it's something which is a learning thing and you need to go off and actually, if you're in a public speaking, getting comfortable with the presentation, if you're just putting it in there and actually not reading through and making it your own, then you don't feel confident in the words that you're speaking or using. And that probably applies to a lot of different things in regards to some data or the way people are doing bits. So yeah, it's probably really important that you do that and figure out the collaboration between that 80% and you as well.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. It's always treat the output with skepticism, you know, healthy skepticism, you know, rather than cynicism, because I think people go to the other extreme sometimes. But yeah, it's absolutely crucial to push back and own the work yourself. You know, like an analogy I would use is if you know, I used to say, you know, AI is like having a kind of intern in your company who's really smart but has never worked in in the setting of your workplace, and is a bit green even though they're really clever. Is that still true? I think they're probably a little more advanced now, but the concept still applies. If you had an intern assisting you with a project, and they gave you a report, you wouldn't just send it out to the CEO without checking it. that's what people are doing with AI. You would cast an eye and you would go, do you know what? You haven't quite got the tone of voice there. If you say that, you'll piss off this person, because this is the reality. You know, as a really daft example where I'm talking to HR people, it's like AI is brilliant in a lot of ways, but it's never had to deal with office politics. You know? And that's like one of those skills that are soft skills, but you know, crucial to help the world, you know, the world turn. So so that's the kind of example I would use there, about how to think about it.
Yeah, and I think it touches on, like, the title of this is AI won't fix your broken culture, right? But as you said, AI won't understand the office politics, and the fact that actually the culture is still people and the people in your organization.
Yeah, of course, none of that changes. The people are more important than ever, not less. And you have to bring them along with the change coming. And that's why I sort of come back to that point. The way that you communicate that to people and get their buy-in is crucial to this being successful. I mean, there are crazy figures about how unsuccessful most like AI pilots have been. I think it's like 80% like don't really bring any return on investment. I mean, it's like, you know, really shocking. And I think that's because people are tackling these change projects very badly. And actually, there were some figures from yesterday, which I have to hand. Who knows? But I thought they were really helpful. So they asked people, there was a study asking people why they don't adopt AI. And 44% said they have no time. 22% said they don't trust the output. And 19% didn't have a clue where to start, which says a lot about how these like change projects are being implemented, because they obviously haven't got the trust of people. They haven't made the space for them to learn, and they clearly haven't equipped them with enough knowledge to sort of self-learn. They just haven't. And I think that's where if you get that feedback from your workforce, then you know there's something a little bit broken about your culture. And another sort of related thing which has sort of really occurred to me a lot lately is about actually your organizational values, and applying those to any major changes that you make in your business. And that's where there's often a terrible disconnect. You know, it's again, nothing has changed in that sort of vague and meaningless values have always been vague and meaningless. If they bear absolutely no relation to how people operate in your organization. But when you're thinking about bringing AI in, you know, to do a lot of the work, you have to make sure that the way you're implementing it is in line with your values. So, you know, transparency, that's probably one of the most frequent values you will see around. Are you actually building AI in a way that is transparent and people can understand it? You know, I don't think those kind of considerations go into what people just see as a tech rollout. And that's, I think, where culture is a real problem, and where people feel unsafe, you know, to the point you were raising. There's a really bad example recently I could think of, Meta, who, you know, very big, powerful, successful company, but I think their leadership is, well, I think somewhat questionable a lot of the time. And like recently, they were, I think without really being clear to them, they were recording all the keystrokes of their employees, a group of engineers, training, using that as training data for AI, and then they sacked them all. You know, and that is not the way to gain the trust of people. You know, for those left in the organization, I'd be looking over my shoulder and not giving my best. You know, and that, with the best will in the world, any sort of major adoption of AI is not going to work if people don't trust you. And that's a message really for organizations. And if there were, you know, if there do have to be job losses, and that will happen sometimes, as I've said before, then you need to be honest about that. You need to be honest about that. It's one of the things I've always really struggled with in HR, is the sort of euphemisms and lack of honesty. You know, don't talk about a transformation project if what you're really masking is a redundancy program. Be honest about that, you know, and support people as best you can to manage the transition. And I think even more so now, it's kind of like, you know, if in a lot of scenarios, people's roles will change. There may be alternatives that come from AI, you know, different types of roles. That's still true. You know, that's, if you look at the examples from history, then, you know, we were all going to lose our jobs when the internet came. That didn't happen. You know, we find different types of jobs. You could say the same of you know, switchboard operators when, you know, automatic exchanges came in. Oh my goodness, loads of people are going to lose their jobs. They all found something else. AI to some degree is the same, but I think it is so dramatically different and so all-encompassing that it will mean a massive period of change. And I think we have to be honest with people and find ways to support them to adapt in a totally different world of working. I'm making it sound very scary, and it is genuinely. I think, you know, there's huge advantages and some very positive things that could come out of it, but it's all to do with how your organization manages it. And I think that's where good leadership is more important now than it ever has been.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because leadership is, I guess, we're going through this whole leadership crisis at the moment as well, right? In regards to them not being trained, maybe when I think about leadership with people, but there's also going to be this element of, okay, so how's it going to be best to implement AI now as well? There's so much responsibility.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've sort of, you know, if we were to bring it back down to the kind of micro level, you know, I'm hugely optimistic about how AI can support managers do their jobs better. You know, often you get hired, you know, you get promoted and put in charge of managing people because you're good at your job. You don't necessarily ask for it. And then you're expected to, you know, be listening to them and giving them time for feedback and making regular one-to-ones and taking a huge amount of time and care for their performance reviews. And we all know in the HR world that the reality is often very different. Some people are brilliant at it, others are not. And it's hugely challenging. You know, they're under pressure and they're expected to do 101 things. And I think that's genuinely where AI can help in AI-supported systems. Because it can deal with a lot of that admin. It can help you know, capture conversations, commitments you've made, next actions. It can help you massively with performance reviews. Like, you know, I use and work with systems which, you know, will summarize all the feedback you've got from 20 different people to help you sort of synthesize it quicker. So there's some really, really practical things it can do. Even like role playing is an excellent thing that a lot of people don't think of using AI for. Most of them now have you know, kind of speech facilities where you can open it up and talk to it like it's real. And one thing which I often demo is you can ask it to pretend to be someone and role play that situation. So if you're a manager and you've got to have a difficult conversation with someone, give them an approximation of what that person is like and what the discussion's got to be, and then role play it. You know, that's, I mean, what a practical, useful skill if you combine it into sort of meaningful learning. You know, people always talk about, you know, manager or leadership development programs. And I think using AI, we can actually do that much better than we ever had done and adapt to people's different learning styles and actually support managers, you know, in a much more proactive way than we ever have, you know, with the best intentions. Every organization in the world talks about, you know, manager upskilling and how they could all do better. I've never been in a place where that isn't true. And I think AI gives real opportunities to do that better.
Yeah. Looking at the time, I'm hearing like quite a lot, right, of important things. Understanding risk data governance and what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do is important. Building trust with the people and the teams sounds like a really important part when it comes to like the culture of the organization and how successful the implementation of AI is going to be. And so actually how you're going to communicate that But then also working with your teams and with the AI to make sure it's working well for everybody involved, and how that can then support those people grow. But then also with leadership, and there's probably needs to be some sort of training and all that kind of stuff. My last question for you is just kind of round it all off. Really, is if you were to go off, somebody listening to this today, what should they be doing tomorrow? What's their first step to maybe improve or increase their opportunity for success out of AI?
I would say don't wait around for someone to come and tell you what's next. Actually, be proactive. That really is the best next step. To say, what are we doing about this? I've got some ideas. I've done a bit of research. I'm going to put forward a pilot proposal to you, to use this for XYZ tool. I'm going to put a business case together to say this is why you should give me and my team access to Claude or Copilot or ChatGPT. That's what I would say. Be proactive. And just it's again sounds like such a cliche, but it can never be truer. Be curious. Be curious. People keep saying maintain your curiosity. Well, if you're not curious, now get curious, because it's the only way you're going to learn. As long as you have the guardrails, once you understand and you feel safe, then play, experiment. Bring AI to the table is a really good phrase. Give it a go. It may not work for the tasks you want to do, but it's the worst it'll ever be. In 3 months' time, it might surprise you. And then the very last thing I think I would say on that, if I'm thinking about like an organizational context, which a lot of people will be, is make those connections across the business. One of the things I think is becoming really clear is that AI is best when you're working cross-functionally. It's anti-silo, if you like, and that is only a good thing, because so many organizations and people work in silos. When it comes to AI, it thrives on the bigger picture. So the more data sources you have, the better. And actually, when different functions are working together, that's when you get the best outcomes. So like classic example here, which is kind of something I'm always banging on about, is how important, your CTO or your CPO or HR director is. Because if they come together, they've covered both the tech side and the people side. They're like a real power couple these days. And then, of course, you're going to bring in operations and all the parts of the business, but think bigger picture, because AI is great at giving you that picture and bringing all your data together and letting you make more of those human connections.
Fantastic. And thank you so much, and appreciate you sharing this knowledge and this and giving me your time as well. I guess people can find you on Iain Morrison on LinkedIn and Enlightened People as well. So go and find out more and keep an eye on what Iain's doing. I'm sure it's going to be very enlightening over the next few months, and he's going to be updating everybody. Thank you, May. Appreciate it again. Everybody else, keep your eye out for the next one, which is happening next week. Just been uploaded with Coach Jim Johnson. More lessons from around leadership from the world of sport. So keep your eye out for that. Anyway, have a lovely week. Speak to you soon, and stay where you are.